I realised it was like I wasn't enjoying just being with him. It was like a job. He was going to be 21 before I knew it, and I would have lost his childhood to worrying and wishing that he could speak when that's not, the biggest deal.
Welcome to the beautiful reality of autism, the podcast where we talk to inspiring parents of autistic children. We talk to autistic adults who speak for the community, and we talk to specialists and thought leaders in the world of autism. And the idea is to give parents of autistic children ideas, inspiration, and hope in their journey of bringing up their young autistic children. The podcast is brought to you by the charity Transforming Autism, and all of our activities are aimed in that direction to help parents to feel empowered to unlock the potential of their autistic children and build the best futures for them so that they can have the most fulfilling lives possible and so that society can benefit from them as well. And the name of the podcast, The Beautiful Reality of Autism, comes from my TED Talk of the same name, which lays out our charity's really unconventional but empowering and distinctive conception of autism, which has gone down really well in the autism community and the community of autism parents. It's now been seen by more than 350,000 people. That's available on YouTube. Today, we're talking to one of those inspiring parents who we mentioned. Her name is Jessica Whalley. She herself became diagnosed with autism at the age of 38, having already given birth to an autistic child who she started to bring up. So, Jessica, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it, Guy.
And I thought it might be good to begin by looking at your childhood, growing up at a time when autism wasn't widely known, wasn't widely understood, and yet you were going through the same process that an autistic child would go through today. How was that?
Well, obviously, I was what's classed as high functioning, which I don't like that term at all, but it's the only thing we can say really. But so obviously on the outside, nobody could see that I was struggling. For me, it was just, and looking back now, knowing what I know, I was lonely. It's very lonely because I knew that I was different, but obviously I didn't know why, and I couldn't express that. I couldn't process it. I was just basically copying everyone around me to try and fit in and be the same, but it wasn't naturally how I wanted to behave, which is something that took me until, just a couple of years ago when I got diagnosed to accept and really stop masking, those traits that are who I am. So yeah, it was difficult, but like I said, of course I wasn't aware of it at the time. It's just looking back now, I can see that.
That's a really common thing that happens to autistic children, particularly autistic girls, isn't it? This idea of masking, this idea of sort of almost feeling that you're not good enough as you are, and having to sort of mimic other people's behaviour to fit in.
There's a lot of traits of autistic girls in particular that are very unknown, because they're obviously very different to boys. And that's a reason why even now, like 30 years later, with all the knowledge we have, those girls still go under the radar, because it's harder to see. But yeah, because we're more socially aware, obviously male and female brains are different in general. Because we're more socially aware as girls, we understand that we need to fit in and therefore copy anyone around us. Because you just want to be the same. All girls, neurodivergent or not, at that age as well, teenage years, you want to just be the same. You don't want to be different. You don't even want a different hairstyle or, clothes. So yeah, it's a difficult time for anyone, but particularly then when you know that there's something different.
And how was it with your family? Did they know that there was something different about you, and how did they deal with that?
No, no, because again, I just went under the radar. I performed well at school without even really trying, because I couldn't revise like for exams and things like that. But I just sort of always passed, at C grade or whatever, the GCSEs, whatever they're called now. But that was without even trying. So, teachers, school reports would always say if she applied herself more, if she revised, she could do better. But I just sort of sailed. So there wasn't any issues. I didn't have bad behaviour. Another thing with autistic girls is that we really want to perform well and be perfect in a way. So, yeah, I wasn't, naughty, or I didn't have bad behaviour. I was just, I would say at home in particular, very antisocial. So I think because I'd like masked all day at school and with friends, when I was at home, I just wanted to be alone, like in my bedroom. I think they probably just thought that I was just, being a teenager and hormonal and whatever. So yeah, no, it wasn't picked up on. No, I just, apart from I was, which again is typical of autistic girls, I was very headstrong, which I still am now. So I wasn't a big fan of being disciplined, even though I did have respect for my parents and they were quite strict.
How were you with your home life? I mean, did you feel that you were understood? Is there anything that you would have liked, or you would like looking back, that your parents knew and understood about you, and how would it have made things different?
To be honest, a lot of women that get diagnosed later in life, a lot do say that they go through like a grieving period where they look back and wish that they'd had the support and people around them had understood. But for me, I'm just a person who's big on not looking back and not having regrets and not wishing things were different, because again, this could be like an autistic thing, but I just think logically, like there's no, like it's black and white. There's no point in that because I can't change it. It can't, it can't be any different. So I actually don't, feel sad or grieve that at all. I mean, it is what it is. But I know that a lot of late diagnosed, people do feel like that they wish, and they think, what would life have been like if I had, had support at a younger age. But again, luckily for me, I haven't gone down the path that a lot of late diagnosed adults have, which is, of course, if they are going through these struggles and they don't understand why, a lot of them, self-medicate with drugs and alcohol and are vulnerable to, abusive relationships and things like that. Luckily, I didn't go down that route. So I've still done like, okay, even though it's been difficult, it's just made me who I am. And I now obviously know and understand myself, and I've accepted it. So
that's the key, isn't it? So for me, it was like a bit different. I didn't go through a process of wishing there was more support from other people. Of course, that would have been nice. I sort of went through a process of sort of not really understanding why there wasn't more support from myself, because, it was partly me doing the judging of myself, that I was different, that I didn't fit in, that there must be something wrong with me. And it was almost like, well, why didn't I just accept myself as I was anyway, regardless of any label or diagnosis or condition?
Yeah. But I just think, like I said, as children and particularly teenagers, whatever it is, like I said, if you've got a different hair colour or, a different, you're small or you're tall or anything like that, you sort of don't accept any difference at that age. Like I said, because you just really want to fit in, regardless of what the difference is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's especially these days because of social media and things, like a lot of kids do struggle for many reasons to fit in. So yeah, I just suppose, we've just got to be grateful that we now understand, because there's a huge amount of adults who are still undiagnosed and still struggling and haven't got a clue why.
But going back to your childhood for a moment, at the time, what would you say, if any? I mean, maybe you weren't aware of any struggles. Maybe you just felt everything was okay. But were you aware of any struggles either at home or at school? Or was it just, life is life? That's what you thought life was at the time?
I definitely knew that there was something different with regards to like friendships in particular. So I never had like a best friend. I was always like the third wheel. If there was a group of three, I would always have been like, the one on the outside, which I never really understood. But I don't think I thought about it too much. Also in school, there were certain lessons that if I wasn't interested in, the greatest teacher in the world wouldn't have been able to get me to take it in. So maths, for example, when it come into high school and algebra and trigonometry and all that kind of stuff was just not for me. And that was the teacher could have been talking in like Chinese. That would never have, I couldn't sit still. Whereas again, now I probably would have been like taken out of the class and had some extra support and things like that. But back then I probably just seemed to be disruptive. I would just be like messing around but obviously I didn't know why I was doing that. But again, it hasn't really affected my future because obviously, basic maths and finances and things like that I'm fine with. So
I can relate to all of that. Pretty much every autistic adult I've spoken to, and probably all autistic males, talk about bullying as being part of their childhood. Was there any of that?
No, that actually wasn't. I mean, everyone has like some kind of, like it's people, picking on you a little bit. Actually, I think because, like I said, it was like, 30 years ago I was in school. I don't think that really anyone like my peers sort of understood that I was really any different because I probably did like a good job of masking.
Yes.
But no, I mean, the only thing I was ever really picked on for would have been like my weight because I was very skinny. But that obviously had nothing to do with being neurodivergent. So no, and again, it was like I just sort of floated around different groups. So I was sort of, like I said, I didn't have a best friend, but I was kind of like okay with everyone. So yeah, I didn't like experience any bullying.
So at what point in your life then, either in your childhood or years later possibly, did you come to the understanding that there was something wrong, not because of the autism, but because of autism not being understood, being autistic in a world that was primarily non-autistic?
So, I had my son, Jude, in 2014. He was diagnosed with autism when he was 3, which is pretty early, but he was non-verbal. So I knew even though I had no experience at all with autism, I had done a lot of research and things from very early on. And pushed to get him diagnosed before he started school so that he would have support. So after he got diagnosed, I then obviously learned all that I could, and I started going on like parenting courses and communication courses and things like that, and was given a lot of information about autism. And it sort of slowly started dawning on me that, this relates to me, which is what happens with most late diagnosed women. It's when their child gets diagnosed and they learn more that they then realise that that's also them. I've always sort of struggled a little bit with my mental health as I got older and like adult life came in, particularly once I became a parent. But after Jude was diagnosed, and I was like planning my wedding, and I got diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and there were just a few things all at once that it sort of become unbearable. So that had been the first time that I went to the GP and sort of spoke about it. And I just literally said, I was overwhelmed and, my brain wouldn't switch off and things like that. And I was told that I had anxiety and depression and put on antidepressants, which is what happens to a lot of neurodivergent people. Particularly, this was 2018. So, 7 years ago. There wasn't as much awareness as there is even now. But I tried about 5-6 different antidepressants and it didn't help because obviously that wasn't the issue. And then I was referred for the autism assessment. That took a year to come through. And by that point, I definitely knew that was me. And, I did get the diagnosis. And then a few months later, I got the ADHD diagnosis. So, yeah, it was, only a few years ago, really. But, yeah, it just become too much to cope with, which, again, is what happens with a lot of adults. Because when you're younger and you don't have, bills to pay and children and relationships, it's easier to sort of just cope. But as you get older, maybe around midlife in particular, which is when a lot of people struggle, neurodivergent or not, it often becomes just unbearable. And that's when, problems start to happen.
And this was going on when you were a parent yourself and you had your own autistic son, Jude.
Yeah.
So how was that? How was it, parenting, having autism, the idea of autism come into your life for the first time through your son? What was that about? How was that period for you?
I had no experience whatsoever. So the word autism was just, my thoughts were, he's not going to have a normal life. And, is he ever going to be able to get a job and get married and all these things? But then after and I just told, like I said, because he's nonverbal and he still is now and he's 11, at the time, all I could think about was when he was going to speak. It was like an obsession. But then he probably got to around 5, so a year or so after he'd been diagnosed, and I just realised that I was going to waste his childhood wishing away. And it wasn't that I wanted to change him because he's amazing and he's the best company, whether he can speak or not. But he was going to be 21 before I knew it. And I would have lost his childhood to worrying and wishing that he could speak when that's not, the biggest deal. He's happy and he's healthy. There are people in much worse situations. So yeah, I just sort of had a word with myself and said, you're going to have to stop this. And that's when I started really getting into, positive thinking and meditating and mindfulness and all that kinds of stuff, because there really is, you're not doing any good by wishing things were different. Or Jude's had speech therapy since he was 18 months old. He has literally all the best support, the best school. So anything I can do is not going to make him talk or prevent him talking. At this point, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And
if you come in with an agenda saying, even if you don't verbalize it, even if you don't communicate it, he's going to pick up on this agenda, telling him you've got an expectation that he should talk. Exactly. And he isn't talking yet, and he'll end up feeling I'm not good enough, and it'll actually delay his speech.
Exactly. And it was I realised it was I wasn't enjoying just being with him. It was like a job. So it was when he came home from school, I'd want to do more speech therapy or games to get him to, play. And it was just constant. And then I just thought for him as well, he's been at school all day. I know he's at a great school with, special teachers and things like that. It's he needs a break, you know, like it's not, it's not, you can't just be like, it's like, you know, the whole thing, like in America particularly, you know, they do ABA, which is very intensive behavioral therapy to sort of make kids act normally. And some people agree with it and some don't. But for me, it's like, I just let him be who he is. That's all we can do. Any parent, that's what we should be doing. Like I said, as long as they do have all the support in place possible, and you keep changing that as they grow, you know, you have just got to accept it and stay positive and just keep living life and not, you know, put pressure on them, and things are going to work out. You can put everything in place that you can, and then you've just sort of got to leave it to, you know, what's going to happen is going to happen.
I think you describe a journey that I think every parent of an autistic child has to go through at some point. And you put it in a really nice way that will be, I think, really helpful to parents of autistic children, because you said at the beginning, it was like a job. Bringing him up was like a job. And by the end of the process, you got to the point where you could actually enjoy him for who he is and make a sort of strong, mutually nourishing relationship with him. What did it take to make that transition?
Like I said, I am very headstrong. So once I realize something or decide on something, then I'm not going to go back on it. So it was like a flashbulb sort of went off, and I had a realization that, you know, look, you're not enjoying this. This isn't what it's about. It's not going to help anyone. Like, I just really, and obviously at the time I was sort of going through my own journey. I just really was like focused on being as positive as I could and only controlling what I could. And, you know, that was just, it just like happened. And I've never like looked back from that. And that's what I try and like tell everyone like who I meet, who's, you know, got neurodivergent kids, or they are themselves, or they're going through the process, is that it doesn't have to be a negative. Like, it's not a negative, don't get me wrong, it's hard. But then parenting in general is hard for different reasons. You know, if your child's getting bullied at school and there's nothing you can do about it, you know, if they're struggling with certain things at school, like, there are all different things that, you know, children struggle with, and then we as parents struggle with. So, you know, you just have to realize that.
You know, your own autism and Jude's autism, at what point did they connect? And, you know, how did that help you in your journey of being a parent to an autistic child?
I mean, I think some people would have the opinion that, you know, autistic people can't be good parents because they might be selfish and, you know, not be able to think about someone else and things like that. But I mean, first of all, that's just, you know, an outdated stigma. In fact, autistic people can and do very often have a high level of empathy, which I am a huge empath. And in my opinion, it's actually helped Jude because, number one, I understand him like nobody else does. Like, he's very similar to me, although he's nonverbal and I've never, you know, had communication problems in that way. Just like his energy levels or his behavior, if he's tired, I can understand it all. I know what to do best for him. And also, I've always liked routine and knowing what's coming next and if there's any changes and things like that. So I just naturally have always put that into place for Jude, which is obviously helpful for autistic kids. So there's a lot of things that I just naturally do that are good for him. And then also, you know, it's a big thing with neurodivergent people that once we hyper focus on something on a subject or whatever it is that we will research and know that subject better than anyone else and find out what's available and things like that. So Jude's autism was my hyperfocus, for many years. And that's why, ultimately I wrote the book and I have the Instagram to help other parents, because I wasn't handed that information. You're told your child's autistic, you get the diagnosis, and that's it. You're left to figure it out yourself. So yeah, years and years of, staying up till the early hours, researching it in different countries and, finding out all the information possible. Again, I do think that's because of my abilities due to being autistic.
Yeah. Yeah. And at that point, you still didn't know that you were autistic, right?
No. So Jude was diagnosed in 2018. I wasn't diagnosed until 22 or 23. So yeah, it was, I didn't know that they were sort of autistic skills, if you like, but I'd always been known for that, but obviously nobody knew why. I was just very organised. I'm always the one that I'd, make the plans for family and, things like that. I was just that person. I always had wrote lists of like what needed to be done. And it's just the way my brain worked. Obviously, until I was diagnosed, I didn't know why that was. And it's funny because once I did get diagnosed, the friends that I've got, which are few, because like I'm not a very socially like outgoing person, I've had those friends for like 30 years since I was in school. So the people in my life have sort of known me forever, and they all said, "Oh, so that's why you're like this. That's why you did this. That's why you were a bit different," like looking back. But at the time, it wasn't mentioned. But it's obviously as we're all getting older and we look back, it's like, right, that's why she is how she is.
You sort of understand it in retrospect rather than in the moment.
Yeah. It's like I never liked, new people coming into the group. Yeah. But that wasn't because I'm unfriendly, because I'm not. And I'm not a nasty person. It was just, I just liked things how I liked them. Or, when I was younger, if we used to go, on a night out, I'd just want to go to the same places in the same order. Like it's funny to look back and think of all these things that I didn't know why. That's just how I was.
It's quite a common experience that the parents of autistic children find out that they themselves are autistic, and what leads them to it,
particularly the women, particularly the mother,
is either sort of having, like with me, it was like I had a really close connection with my son. There was a mutual understanding there that it didn't make sense because I didn't know I was autistic at the time. And for other people, it's like, when it's that understanding of that sort of people think, well, do you know what? That's me. I've got a lot of this stuff. And it's sort of quite common for parents, one parent or sometimes both parents, to find out they're autistic. Was it like that for you?
Yeah, I mean, and it's my opinion that, there's a whole lot that needs to be improved and changed with regards to the whole autistic like diagnosis and assessment process and everything like that. But in my opinion, we now know that it is, highly hereditary. So when a child, because obviously children are in school and, monitored and referred from school, it is likely that they're the ones that would be picked up upon first. If a child is diagnosed, then the parent should also be assessed just automatically, because it is very likely that one or the other will be also autistic. And whether they, I've spoke to a lot of people that think, well, actually, I do think I'm autistic, but I don't feel the need to get diagnosed, which is fine. some people, can cope and manage, and like they're just happy with how they are. But in my opinion, particularly for women, with our hormones and as we get to like menopausal age and things like that, it will at some point become too much to cope with it. So I just feel like that diagnosis is worth having, so that when you get to that point where you're struggling, then you can get the support, because obviously without a diagnosis, you can't get any support. And I don't just mean like, I'm not saying everyone with ADHD, for example, needs medication. They don't, but it's having the awareness and the understanding of yourself and how you work, and then being able to make changes in your life and accepting that some days are going to be more difficult than others, but that it will pass, and understanding why, rather than thinking that you're like losing your mind, because that's how it feels sometimes,
As well as being really interested in autistic girls for obvious reasons, I know that another of your interests is and passions actually is about the importance of self-care for parents of autistic children, and particularly if they're autistic themselves. Can you say a little bit more about that, and what advice would you give to parents about that aspect of self-care as a parent?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of, mums, we just want to be like super mum. Again, that's whether you've got neurodivergent kids or not. Like, it's just a sort of thing where we've been conditioned in from childhood that, the mum does everything and, is fine. And she can do everything, and we are, females are like the strongest people, in the world. But particularly if you've got neurodivergent kids, I've learned that, self-care and having respite is vital, because, the saying, if you don't look after yourself, you can't look after anyone else, is so true. You cannot be at your best if you are, burnt out and not recharged and haven't had, time to regulate your sensory needs and recharge your batteries. Rest it's a requirement. It's not a reward. It's not something that, we need to take better care of ourselves and treat ourselves how we treat everyone else. We worry about everyone else and not ourselves, which again, and again, that's why when we get to midlife, we often, burn out. So we just need to know that and know that it's not selfish. And it's also something I tell myself, because all mums get mum guilt if they have to work or, they go out with friends or whatever it is. But it is also good for our kids to have connection and bond with other people. You're not doing them any favors by just keeping them with you. Like, that's not real life. They need to interact with other people and do different things, and it's good for them as well, especially if they're autistic, to communicate with other people and see how, different households work and just how things are different. So we need to give ourselves a break, and definitely scheduling that time. Particularly for me, it's helpful, through the week. So I have a break at the weekend. It's difficult. It makes things easier for me when things are difficult to know that I've got that break coming. Not even to do anything particular. Sometimes I literally just don't speak to a soul, and I'll just be quiet, because I need to calm down and just not socialize and, just be quiet for, 24 hours or whatever it is. Especially because many autistic kids, have sleep issues. So I don't sleep well, which isn't good for anyone, but particularly when you're neurodivergent, your brains need longer to recharge and recover. So yeah, I need that time, because, if I'm not performing at my best, then I'm not giving Jude the best. So yeah, you really need to, remember that as like parents, definitely.
You know, on the surface, it sounds really obvious, but it's a big step for parents to make, isn't it? Because it's almost like the tendency is, well, my needs are important, but they're less important because I have a child who really needs me. And it's, you know, and it's really hard to make that transition and let that go and to sort of recognize the truth, because you know, it's true, but you don't want to accept it, that if I burn myself out, I'm going to be able over the long term to give much less to my child.
Exactly. Yeah. Jude's 11 now. It probably took about 10 years. It's only about a year ago that I started taking those breaks. And even now, still, you know, I do have that guilt, particularly if I've been busy through the week. And then I'm not going to be there at the weekend. You know, I do have that guilt, but then, you know, I've put in the work and built that foundation with Jude for all these years that I know that he is secure and safe and feels loved and knows that I will always come home. It's often, and again, neurodivergent kids or not, it's worse for us than the kids. Kids are fine. You know, you go away for the weekend, you come back, they will have been absolutely fine. And at the bare minimum, they've been fed and watered and they're alive and they're healthy. You know, that is, you know, we obviously just overthink things as parents, and, you know, it's never the case. Like, you know, it's fine.
You've written a book about all this, haven't you, Jess?
Yes.
Tell us just a little bit about that and where people can get it if they'd like to.
Yeah, so it's called The Autistic Mom, MOM, and it is on Amazon. My Instagram is at _the AA life _, and there's a link on there for that. So that is, I mean, there's a huge amount of information in there about autism and ADHD, just like the basics and, like, you know, a little bit of the scientific facts of it, because I think that a lot of people think that it's just maybe, especially when you get diagnosed as an adult, it's kind of like a personality trait, but it's not. There are differences in the brain, like it's neurological. It's not, you know, just an excuse. And then, you know, information for parents, the things I've learned over the years. Like I said, I did a lot of research that for whatever reason, some parents might not be able to do, whether they've got their own kids or, you know, they work full time, like it's hard. And then for late diagnosed adults or adults who are thinking that they should be diagnosed. And yeah, just a little bit about my background and life story and my journey to getting diagnosed and, you know, getting on the best like treatment path for me, which, like I said, you know, it's not about everyone being medicated for ADHD or, you know, I mean, there isn't a medication for autism, but it's everything that comes with it. So the knowledge and the understanding, acceptance, changing lifestyle, changing things in your diet, that really all play a part in improving. And also accepting that, I mean, I don't wish to be any different or to be neurotypical. I genuinely don't, because how I am has allowed me to get to where I am and to be the best parent for Jude and get him all the best support and be as strong as I am. Don't get me wrong, there are times, like, I would love to just have a neurotypical brain for like a day to see how it feels. And I would love to be able to give someone my brain and let them have that for 24 hours, because, you know, they would probably have a lot more sympathy for me than what they do, because it's you know, it's hard to describe to people that don't live with this brain. But yeah, it's like accepting it and being grateful for it, but for whatever reasons, you know, that it's a positive for you.
Great. Thank you, Jess. And to finish, I always ask 3 questions, same question to every guest. And the first one of those is, we talk about autism a lot, but there's no commonly agreed precise definition for it. So in your understanding and experience, what actually is autism?
Well, I mean, in basic terms, like Jude's got younger cousins who are, 7, 8. So they obviously ask questions about why Jude can't talk and, what is autism and things like that. So in basic terms, I tell them that it's just a difference and that his brain works differently to other people's. All of our brains work differently. Everyone's better at some things than others. Everyone has different skills, different personalities. So that it's just a difference, and his brain works differently, and that sometimes, he needs quiet time. Sometimes he needs time alone. Sometimes he might not want to be around them, but it's not because he doesn't like them. His behaviors aren't the same as other people's, and why that is. So,
okay. Second question, what is your, if you had only one message to parents of autistic children, what would it be? What would they be well advised to bear in mind or remember or to know?
The biggest thing would just be to accept it and to really think of all the positives. Because look, it's not going to change, autism or ADHD, they are lifelong conditions. It's not going to be cured. It's not going to get, it's not, as you get older, it can get easier because you have more understanding and you get used to things and you have the experience, but it's never going to go away fully. So, logically, you need to put yourself in that positive mindset and accept it and not think negative about it at all, because number one, for yourself, because it's just pointless. And number two, like you said, the atmosphere, even if you're not saying it, the atmosphere and the vibe that you're giving off to your children, if you're thinking, oh, it's so hard and I wish that they wasn't like this and I wish they could do this and be like other kids, like that will come across. Children, particularly neurodivergent children, are very, inept at picking up on things that are unsaid because of the way they have learned to communicate. So they pick up on, nonverbal communication much more than other people. So you really need to make yourself believe, that and be positive about it, because there are so many positives about it.
Do you think that some of them actually intuitively have a heightened sense of intuition in terms of?
100%. Yeah. I mean, I definitely do. Again, which is something I've always had, and I wouldn't have known why. But autistic children, even if they're nonverbal, they definitely do. It might take a little while for them to bond with someone and accept someone. But once they do, that is pure, and it's not for any other reason that they, enjoy being with that person and they appreciate them. And, if they show you affection, and they will never forget you. They'll never forget, your name or your smell. Like Jude smells people. And he would know, anyone's smell, and, he's very affectionate, but then, he can pick up on if people are, let me think of the right word, maybe like awkward around him and don't know what to do, or those people that are accepting and, literally see him for who he is and not the autism, and just see him for who he is, and which luckily, everyone in his life does. And he's, he's very loved. So yeah, they definitely do. They definitely are intuitive. Yeah. As kids and as adults,
Yes. And final question. In your perfect world, how is autism understood and how is it integrated?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we have made, huge positive progress with awareness being raised over the last few years, but there's obviously still a lot more to be done. But yeah, like I said, I just want it to be seen as and thought of as just a difference, and that difference in any form isn't wrong or bad or strange. Like I was saying, even, like hair colour, if someone's got, red or ginger hair, they're kind of ostracised a little bit because they're, the minority, or, if people have got different skin colour or, the sexuality, there's all different minorities that are sort of put on the outskirts of society, and that, it's a similar thing, but that shouldn't be the case because we're all human beings. We all, have a role to play in society. And I write this in the book as well, that, the world wouldn't be what it is without neurodivergent people. And that's a fact, because those people that have invented things and created things, many of them are autistic, because the way the brain works has to be different for them to think outside of the box that, neurotypical people just couldn't do. So again, we are needed in the world, and people need to accept that and realize, the positives of it and stop thinking about it as a negative. That is, my wish. I mean, when I tell people that Jude's autistic, and this isn't, saying that they're bad or they're wrong or that it upsets me, but it's just like the way society is that people will say, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. And I'm like, no, don't be sorry. I mean, because I take that rudely, but they haven't meant it rudely. But, so I want that kind of stuff to change, like that stigma that is so like ingrained in society, and, we've been conditioned with that, and to just accept us for who we are. And that's it. Just let us be ourselves, and, things would be much better and we would be much more productive then in society as well.
It's a great note to end on. Thank you very much, Jess. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you.
You too. Thanks, Guy.